Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for your time and attention for joining us here today. My name is John Bristow. Before I turn things over to Robert and Kit, talking about all the great things that we have around automating Kubernetes deployments, for example, I'd like to take care of some housekeeping items. For those who are wondering, this is a live webinar, yes, and you are in the right place, so don't worry. This is a webinar designed for folks who are interested in learning more about Kubernetes, etc. So to give you guys some context here, this is, as I find the right button. This is the right location to find all kinds of webinars available from Octopus Deploy. You'll find out more by visiting this site called our webinars site, which is at octopus.com/webinars. There you can see a bunch of webinars we have coming up. So today's webinar, obviously featuring Rob and Kit listed here. We have some other webinars coming up later on this month. So on Thursday, or I guess your Wednesday, if you're joining us in the US or the UK, we have another webinar entitled Free Your Teams from Maintenance Tasks with Runbooks. That will feature Michael and Steve talking about runbooks. We've got the Octopus 101 coming out in November. And then we have two really exciting webinars coming up later on. The first is on November 12th, we'll have Adam and Graham talking about integration between Octopus Deploy and HashiCorp Vault. So this is specifically secure your CD at scale with these two products. And so if you're looking to integrate HashiCorp Vault as part of your deployments and utilizing that for securing your credentials in the context of a deployment, feel free to use that. And then finally, we got on November 14th, introducing config as code for runbooks. This is a new feature that is very, very exciting. We've got a number of folks on the team here who will be talking about that, which is great to see. Another resource we're checking out, obviously, is Shipped. So we've got a conference coming up. You'll find out more information at octopus.com/shipped. We're approximately 3 weeks away, which is great. Our calendar, our schedule, and all of our speakers are now listed. So if you're all interested in finding out more information, you can visit our site, check out the calendar, and also, of course, register for the event itself. So make sure to register for Shipped. We'd love to see you there. Lots of great content, including speakers like the ones we have today, talking about a wide variety of topics on Octopus Deploy, on Argo, on CodeFresh, GitOps, etc. Check out more at octopus.com/shipped, which is great. And then finally, because we'll be talking a little bit about Kubernetes today, we've got a site that's worth noting, which is /Kubernetes, octopus.com/Kubernetes. There you'll find information about everything that we do around Kubernetes for your deployments, etc. If you wanted to find out more, please feel free to visit that location. And with that, without any further ado, I'd like to turn it over to today's hosts, Kit and Robert. Gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Hey, hello everyone. So today we're talking about how we can enhance, improve deployments to Kubernetes with Octopus. And let's start with who we are. So we have Rob, who is our principal software engineer, working with us on the Kubernetes deployments, and I'm Kit. I'm working on the product side on the same team. And yep, we are here to talk about Kubernetes, and we're working on Kubernetes in Octopus. So what we'll be talking about today. So within the last couple of years, we shipped a lot of improvements to Kubernetes experience in Octopus. And we actually had a lot of webinars and documentation and different playbooks about each individual feature. But I want to bring that all together and combine a few of them, explaining how they all can work to create new scenarios in Octopus and how you and why and when you might need that. So we'll talk about something we shipped last year, but we'll finish with some new additions we shipped a couple of months ago, and one of them we're actually shipping right now as we speak. And why would you be interested? So if you're working on Kubernetes with Octopus, if you administrate Octopus or just deploying with Octopus, and if you are, let's say, mid-entry level expert in Octopus and Kubernetes, you'll probably find it useful. If you're an expert, well, maybe listen to this anyway, and maybe you'll find something new, but most likely you've heard about this concept before. All right, let's jump into that. So what we'll talk about today. First of all, we'll talk about the new features. Again, something we shipped right now, something we shipped months ago, something we shipped earlier this year or end of last year. Then we'll talk about scenarios and best practices where you might face these issues, where you might face the need to use them. Then Rob will walk through the demo and show us how actually you can configure this in Octopus and how it will work. And then I'll walk through a few materials where we'd like to get your feedback on and where you can learn more about everything we showed today. All right, let's do it. So why are we even talking about this and what features we're actually talking about? So the first one is sourcing files from Git. This is probably the first one we shipped more than a year ago, and that's something I hope you're familiar with. So in a very nutshell, since mid last year, you can actually sort artifacts for your deployment from Git instead of sending them as a package. So that could be used for scripts, that could be used for YAML files, for customize, for Helm values, and benefits are obvious. Store them in Git, evolve them in Git, use PRs to upgrade them, and still use all that Octopus have regarding templating. The next one is kind of complementary to the previous one, and what is used even earlier, maybe a couple of years ago, is reference artifacts. So this allows you to show Octopus, connect Octopus to the feed where you store your containers or Helm charts, but most commonly containers. And then Octopus will get information about a container, like container image tag or container image, and store it as a variable in a release. What it gives you is, if you go back and think about sourcing YAML files from Git, like YAML configuration or YAML manifest, you don't actually need to update the manifest every time you have a new version of a container, which could be annoying, or maybe use it as a template across multiple apps. So instead, you can keep the configuration there and supply the new container image with this reference artifact through Octopus at the deployment time. Again, small thing, but works nicely with the previous one. Finally, earlier this year, we added external feed triggers. That leverages both of the previous features. External feed trigger can now get information which you referenced the container or Helm chart which you referenced before, and proactively look at the updates. And with this one, Octopus can create a new release every time you upload a new container or every time you upload a new Helm chart. And again, we'll talk about how you can apply it later, but I guess you can imagine that from here, you don't need any external tool or manual process to create releases. Octopus will just do it for you. And finally, what we're shipping right now is Git triggers. Rob, over to you. And you muted, Rob.
Sorry about that. Sorry, everyone. Thanks, Kit. Yeah, I'm really excited about this new feature as it really starts to provide some flexibility around pull-based pipelines. So, artifacts typically that you generate via CI provide this opportunity for you to create actions to trigger your CD tooling and act and create downstream releases. As the rise of GitOps has shown, however, not everything is a compiled or built artifact, right? This new capability allows you to define not only what repositories you want Octopus to watch and create releases on, but also specify the specific paths in that repository, right? Which is really important to ensure that the releases are created only when something actually changes that's meaningful for your release. The great thing about this addition to Octopus is it not only provides that pull-based semantics for Kubernetes type deployments, which everyone's kind of used to if you're doing Argo deployments today, but because Octopus supports so many more sort of generic deployment patterns, you can also bring that GitOps mentality to your Terraform infrastructure. So creating a release and deploying and applying your Terraform files as soon as there's a change there, or potentially scripts or anything like that that you might store in Git and want to release as soon as it's committed to your repository. This supports triggering on the releases, created from your config as code project. So if you're using config as code, your deployment processes themselves can be triggered when they change, or on external repositories, as Kit just mentioned earlier with the new feature. So when we talk about GitOps, this is one of those key mechanisms, right? It's that third principle based around pull-based semantics. And so with this feature, you can now follow those best practices directly and natively within Octopus. Thanks, Kit. Next slide. And so we've talked about a bunch of great new features and additions, and these are all about improving automation, which is about making it easy to get your code changes from sort of repository to production. But let's talk about the flip side of this, right? If you're using branch protections in something like GitHub, like we are at Octopus, You've probably got things like, maybe ensuring you've got 2 pull requests before merging your code. Maybe you've got quality gates. So you probably don't want your CD tool blindly ignoring these attempts at security and allowing your engineers to push whatever they want from any branch into production just because you're trying to follow GitOps practices, right? So if you're sourcing directly from these repositories, why shouldn't that similar-minded protection exist in your CD tooling? And so that's what some of these branch protections allow us to do. This allows you to control what branches or tags can be used in deployments and protects against accidental, or malicious attempts to push resources that haven't yet been validated. So for example, you might want to enforce the fact that feature branch testing changes include resources that come from your branches with a certain, say Git branch prefix, and they should automatically go to your test environments, but never go any further than that. Or perhaps, as is more common, you mainly want your releases into production to come from a mainline branch. These rules can apply to the config as code repository itself, so you can control the releases of the deployment process. Now, this allows you to empower the other members of your team to update the processes as they're working on them and add new capabilities, but enforce those Git-specific gates before it becomes available for a standard release. Not only do these rules prevent the wrong resource being used, but they also ensure that the rules are automatically followed when you're creating the release. And so this will then reduce the cognitive load that your release team might need to consider when they're sort of creating out new releases. Let's talk about some of the scenarios and best practices now for these new features. Back to you, Kit.
Yeah. So before we go there, let's just again quickly look through everything we just mentioned. So Octopus can source files from Git. That applies to scripts, YAML files, customization folders, customization overlays, and base structure. If you don't want to change these files, you can, but if you don't want to change these files every time you create a new version of your app, you can also source container images as a variable in Octopus and supply this during deployment time. On top of that, you can create releases if a Helm chart you're using or a container image you referenced got an update, so you don't have to create releases in any other way. And if your Git file, if your file stored in Git got updated, you can also create releases now. And as you know, we didn't mention it, but that's been here for ages. If you have a release, you can apply lifecycle, and basically creating release means you can start deployment straight away, and you can deploy it through all of the environments to production, or you can specify rules and, let's say, deploy to a couple of environments with automated promotion, then wait for manual approval, or stuff like this. So this is obviously also combined with that. And finally, you can actually choose which branch could be used to deploy to which lifecycle. So you can prevent issues like, let's say, unverified configuration for of version of this particular manifest got deployed straight to production. So that won't happen with the last feature. Okay, so how we can now bring it all together and combine this in a few scenarios which actually might be useful and applicable. Before we go further, just please don't hesitate to post your questions in the chat, and we'll try to comment on them as we go. Okay, so let's talk about 4 of the scenarios. And there are probably more, and we are not talking about the simplest one, just normal deployment. So we're talking about a few more complicated. The first one, probably the most complicated one, is what if I want to use one configuration template across hundreds of microservices? I want to make it easy. I want to add a new microservice without any headache, and I want to still manage configuration for all of them from a central point, and reduce the automation load and just cognitive load. Then we'll talk about what if I'm deploying something which I actually didn't develop, like a third-party app like Grafana or Prometheus. After that, we'll talk about a scenario when I have one big CI pipeline for a huge, maybe monorepo, where I'm building few containers from one pipeline, and how can I automate the deployment for these containers with Octopus. And finally, how can I actually use feature branches with Octopus, and how I can leverage Octopus to deploy a feature to only certain environments in a safe way. Okay, let's start with this one. So imagine this, I have many microservices. These microservices are very similar. They maybe have a few different options, but more or less configuration stays the same. And I want to evolve this configuration through one template. I don't want to have a version of my Helm chart or my customization files for each microservice. I want to have one file, and then if I want to change something, I will just change it once, and all the microservices will get the update. At the same time, I maybe still want to add some nuances, some extra details for each of my microservices. And most likely, I have environments, and these environments also a bit different. So I want to introduce a few more details for each of these environments. So how can I manage all that? So with the set of features which I discussed, what would you do? You would maybe reference one Helm chart, your golden template Helm chart, in all the projects. That would be your image. And you won't change this Helm chart often because, again, you don't want to affect all the projects at the same time. For the project level, you'll probably reference a Helm values file. And now you can do it from Git. So each team owning a microservice would say, yep, I want these extra values to change, to adjust the template and, change a few things for my project. And then in the application and the environment level, you would define Octopus variables, saying, okay, for this environment, I want to have maybe this label, this number of replica sets, and maybe a few secrets or a few environment variables. So that's the setting. Now the question is, how do you trigger deployment for in this scenario? And here you can use all features we discussed before. So in the normal day-to-day experience, you would probably use something like release trigger. So Octopus project will look for a new container. As soon as the new container for a microservice is ready, it will create release and start the deployment. That's your day-to-day operations. Maybe you'll have multiple releases like this every day for each microservice. And then at some point, your platform team might change the Helm chart, and maybe that's a security fix which requires immediate update and redeployment for all the projects. That's where you can use another trigger and create a new release for all the projects as soon as the new version of the Helm chart is available. And you can do the same for Helm values. Let's say you know that there is a critical change in the Helm values file. And again, adding another trigger, you can create release for this and push the update for your project from here. So using all three sources and these triggers, you don't need to do any manual steps. You don't need to think about if I forgot to create release for this project or not. You'll just have it running automatically and deployed through your environments without with a very minimal effort from your side. Okay, let's move on to something a bit less complex. So what if I'm just bootstrapping my cluster with Octopus? I want to install like Kubernetes dashboard, Grafana, a few other apps on every cluster. In this case, I'm not responsible for most of these Helm charts. They are produced by community, but I still want to have the latest version of these Helm charts, of these apps running on my clusters. So I could have a task and maybe look through all the versions every Monday, let's say, and see, okay, I want this or I don't want this. But instead, you can ask Octopus to do this. So Octopus will look for the new version of the Helm chart, create releases, and let's say you can automatically deploy this new version to a couple of classes. Let's say you have 10, you can deploy it to the first two. These classes would be your dev environment for cluster bootstrapping. Then Monday morning, you'll say, okay, the new release just happened. I have apps deployed to the first environment. You can quickly check if it's working as you expected, and then just click deploy button and promote the change to all other clusters within the next couple of minutes. So that's the whole point. You don't need to discard these updates yourself. Jumping to the next one. What if you have one big repo where you, and we know some people do that. It's as valid option as any other. So let's say you have 10, 50 microservices and you develop them in one repo and you have one big side pipeline building all these microservices and uploading containers to the image repository. And sometimes if you updated just a couple of the microservices, this pipeline builds 2 containers, and sometimes you will update all 15 of them. So you could add a lot of steps in your pipeline and trigger the right releases for right containers in Octopus together with uploading the container to container image repository. Or you could use a trigger and then Octopus will just figure out which container was updated, create release, and start promotion. So this way you make your CI part a little bit easier, and Octopus gets a little bit smarter. Finally, let's talk about the branch testing. Rob, over to you.
Thanks, Kit. Yeah, so combining triggers, one of the features we talked about earlier, and branch protections really makes safely testing feature branches much easier, and adds those kind of guardrails that really you want when you're doing feature branch deployments. Feature branches inherently contain risk, right? Because it's not necessarily validated. You haven't had your PR reviews, etc. Engineers are just working on changes. So you want to ensure that that risk is constrained in your test environments. Since there may be many of these feature branches created through the day by your engineers, having that release automation set up also makes it much easier for your team to make use of it without having to go in and out of Octopus and click buttons to deploy. So those branch protections we added, though, ensure that those resources that are used, whether it be sort of images in your sort of Kubernetes deployment, or perhaps there's Git resources in a specific branch, make sure that those resources only go to the environments you want them to. What you want to do is ensure that your unverified code can be tested while staying in their lane, staying in their test environments, right? To get these capabilities, you're going to go into channels and create package version rules. You're going to go and create the Git resource branch protections. And this will set those controls and those guardrails around the entire process. And that brings that safety and protection. In addition, when you create those trigger rules, you can ensure that when those triggers sort of occur, that they're evaluated in the context of those images. So if you're using a versioning schema that provides a pre-release tag that designates it as a feature branch, for example, you can ensure it goes to the test environment and not to production. And this way you'll get that automation you need while still having the protection. And this allows you to get that sort of feature branch testing really easily set up for your team. There's some upcoming work that one of the teams within Octopus are working on actually right at this moment around ephemeral environments. So stay tuned for those exciting capabilities, because that will supercharge this feature branch testing even further. So we've talked through a lot about all these different scenarios and best practices. Let's put them to the actual test. Let's run through a demo. So if I can take over the screen, thank you. So here's a project I created earlier. It's called Octo Pet Shop. It's version controlled. So for those of you who played with CAC, you know what that means. Basically, the deployment process itself is in Git. And we've got a single customized deployment. We've got a single customized step. If we have a quick look at what we've got in the repository itself, here's my Octo Pet Shop project. And I've got a customized file. And here's my Octopus overlays that will provide the values I want at deployment. We won't go too deep into customize in this webinar because we've kind of talked about it in the past. But suffice to say that when Octopus runs a deployment, it will use these overlay files and perform whatever relevant variable replacements are kind of required. So I've also configured a couple of triggers. So if we have a look at it, here's our two new triggers. I've got the external feed trigger. So what this will do is this will trigger whenever there's a new build of this image in this case, and it will trigger and deploy in the mainline lifecycle, right? So what this means is whenever I create a new image from my repository, it gets pushed to the Docker registry, and Octopus will be watching that registry and will create that release. Let's have a quick look at that. Let's trigger that. So here I've got a PR. I'm going to merge a feature change, and I've changed the name from contact us to just contact. I've been told by my designer that I'm too wordy. Us is too wordy. So we've got this, and let's merge it. Merge our pull request. And so what this is going to do is this is going to kick off a GitHub action. So I'm using a GitHub action in this to actually perform the build. And this will run the build in the background. And when it's complete, it'll push an image and this trigger will kick off. The great thing about these triggers, though, is that now I can go off and start doing some other work, knowing that that release will get deployed as soon as it's ready. So in the meantime, what I want to do is update my process so that I can run a health ping basically before marking this deployment as successful. And with that in place, I'd potentially be able to automate even the deployment to production. So you can imagine my staging deployment might deploy the manifests, etc. I might add this second step, which will hit the endpoint, run a bunch of checks, and then if that's successful, automatically deploy to production. Kind of getting me that bit closer to continuous delivery. So let's do that. So what I've got here, and we'll talk about this in the context of test. What we want to do is test this, right? Because here I've got a bunch of changes, and I'm going to be putting it into my deployment process. So I want to actually test this works. So here's my code change. It's going to basically just really simple. It's going to get the service and do a health ping. So let's create a pull request from that. So I've created this in a branch called feature ping. What we're going to do is come back to Octopus, and we can see we've got feature ping here. So again, because this is config as code, I can jump between the different branches and make changes to my deployment, knowing that my master, in this case, my mainline release pipeline remains unchanged until I've sort of validated those changes. So what I'm going to do though is I need to add a new step. And I'm going to run a script, right? Because I've just added that script to the repository. We'll call this run health ping. We're going to source, in this case, the script from the Git repository. And so here we've got these two options. In this case, because the resource is in the same repository that I've got my config as code projects defined in, I can just add the path in directly here. If I was sourcing it in a third-party location, I can provide the repository and include a bunch of credentials, and that'll be pulled down when it's deployed. In this case, we are using that Git project, so let's add the path that I added it to a minute ago. That's our path. We've got no parameters in this case. We're going to run it against the Kubernetes target, and we're also going to make sure that it runs in the context of the namespace that I defined in my variables. And so here we've got our script, so let's commit that. And then let's run this. And through the magic of demos, we will hope that this entirely works. So this is interesting now, right? So I've created my, I've created a change in my feature ping branch. But what this is telling me is I've got some branch rules configured. So I can't deploy this feature branch change directly to my default channel. And this is what we defined in our channels. These are the feature branch protections. What I've defined here is I've said that in my default channel, when it's doing deployment, the project repository, in this case where the config as code files are sourced, must come from the master branch, right? And so Octopus has found one branch there called master. But conversely, I've got a feature branch channel. And here I've given it a glob wild path. And this is saying that deployments into this lifecycle, into this channel, i.e. this lifecycle, can come from can use any branch that has this branch format. So let's go back and let's try to create that release now, knowing that. So we can see that's failed. But if I change to feature testing now, that's great. Octopus says, all good, you're good to go. So you can see I've got that protections now that just because I made a change in that deployment process, I might not want that to go to production until the changes, which are in Git, because this is a config as code project, have been validated. So let's save that. We'll run that. If we go back and have a look, we can see previously our deployment to our trigger kicked off, and that's created that release. And we'll just have a look at the trigger itself just to validate that that's what happened. You can see here that this trigger last executed a few minutes ago, a minute or two ago, discovered a package, and it's created this release. So that deployment has already gone out. Let's have a quick look at that change. So you can see here my amazing Octopet web shot. You can see I'm just running in a local cluster at the moment. Contact us. If we refresh, we should see that it turns to contact. So that was great. That change that I made, once I merged that into master, I didn't need to do anything else. And Octopus has automatically picked that up and done that deployment. That's awesome. Let's go back and check out our second process. So you can see here how I can now, through this automation process, I can have multiple tasks going on, knowing that once I sort of kick off the process, Octopus will pick up and allow me to concentrate on the next thing, right? Avoiding that that context switching. Let's see if my health ping works. Give it a minute or two because. So what's happening here is this is running that deployment. In this case, this is now running the deployment to my cluster through that customize step. And what we'll expect it to do eventually is it'll start giving us a bunch of information about the resources that have been updated, etc. Now you can see here our live objects, our Kubernetes object status is showing us the pods coming and going as they're switching around. That's really great. Let's see if any of them are in progress still. It's still running. Awesome. So that's deployed, and now it's running my health ping. We'll give it a minute because it's not super important whether this actually succeeds or fails. I'm not really testing my script. I'll assume my bash scripting is amazing. But what this now means, let's assume that that has completed successfully, is I've validated that this works in my branch. I've protected it from going to master until it's been checked. Now potentially someone else can come along and perform that review and merge it. And once that merges, then we'll be able to create that deployment into master, right? So I've got that protection, but I've got that automation as well, using all those features, using the triggers, I'm using the Git resourcing, I'm using branch protections. And so it's really sort of supercharging that whole deployment process. Yeah, hopefully that was interesting and useful, and you can make use of some of those new features in your projects today. Back to you, Kit.
Cool. Thanks, Rob. So to sum it up, we know that a lot of people using Octopus already use some of these features. Some older features we introduced last year were used by hundreds of companies. Something we introduced a bit earlier this year, maybe used by dozens. What we want to do here is to show how they can actually work together. So yes, it's great if you just create releases from Helm chart upgrades or container image upgrades, and it's definitely beneficial if you source, if you use container information as a variable and supply it during deployment time, so you don't need to update your configuration every time you create a new release, etc. But it's way better if you just combine them together, because when you can have truly powerful options and just automate deployments across many projects or different feature branches, and just separate concerns. Allow one group of people manage your core configuration, another group could manage your Helm values, and someone else would be able to manage variables, and it's all be safe, protected. You'll always have information about who did what, and it will be still fully automated process with minimal manual intervention. So that's the whole point of this. So yeah, if you have, by the way, if you have any other ideas or you have scenarios where you apply these features or other Kubernetes features I want to share, please let us know. I would really love to talk to you about it. And maybe we have another webinar showing, these are 5 more scenarios which people actually use in real life and benefit from these new improvements. Okay, so but let's say, what if you want to learn a bit more about this? Because probably webinar isn't enough to just start going in and configuring your new deployments. So you can obviously go into our documentation, and it's all there. So we have the whole big website subsection of our docs dedicated to Kubernetes now. We just recently updated it. So now all the Kubernetes related articles in one place. And you can find, can we copy the link in the chat? Yes, thank you. So yeah, so you'll find information there. You'll find some one-on-one guides, step-by-step guides for Helm. You'll find feature descriptions, information about Kubernetes agent, information about Kubernetes API targets, and other things. So everything about Kubernetes. You'll find there also 2 more articles. One of them is particular about how you can track third-party Helm charts. This is like just simple guide 101, so you can simplify this configuration for you, and it's helpful for tasks like cluster bootstrapping. And finally, external feed triggers. This relatively new feature also has a page, and you'll find information there. So obviously, use the docs. You'll find way more information about all other features in Octopus. How can you help us if you want to help us? So what we just discussed is not the end of our roadmap for Kubernetes. We're actually working on way more. And some of these are coming later this year, others will come next year, and a few more we're considering. So what we're actually working on now, we're working on platform object status, so you can observe what's going on in the cluster in the real time, not just during the deployment time. We just kicked off a new project about manifest inspection. So Octopus will show you what code, what configuration was deployed to the cluster per object. So you can open like deployment and see, hey, that's the YAML for this particular deployment, how it was applied to the cluster. And we're thinking about a few more things like add more permissions for the agent or more comprehensive monitoring of Kubernetes resources after deployment was executed. So please look at our roadmap and let us know which of these makes more sense. And if you can leave a comment and provide us an example or why you're interested in this particular feature or how you would like to maybe make it better or suggest something else, that's really appreciated. And if you mention in the comment that you'd like to chat with us, I'm gladly follow up and send you a calendar invite and let's meet and discuss more. So please go to the roadmap, share your thoughts, vote for features, let us know what you prefer to see first, and let's have a chat about it. And with that, that's it for today. A short one. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, John.
Thanks, everyone.
And thanks, everyone who joined the webinar.
Awesome stuff. Thank you very much. Sorry, I'm on mute now. Sorry about that. Thanks everyone for joining us for the webinar. Really appreciate it. Just to wrap things up, just wanted to provide you guys another sort of housekeeping item here. So the roadmap that Kit recently just referred to is this roadmap here. If you haven't seen this, this is a great resource if you're wondering what's coming beyond anything relating to Octopus, etc. You can find it at roadmap.octopus.com. It should be noted that we also have a roadmap also available for CodeFresh, which you'll find at roadmap.codefresh.io. And it will look like this. So similar type of experience, which is great. Don't forget, we've got our webinars coming up later this month and also next month. We've got some great webinars for you to check out. All these will be made available on YouTube. They'll all be streamed to our social media like you're joining us from today. We've also got Shipped, octopus.com/shipped. Sign up today. We would love to see you at this event. It's a 2-day event. It's a virtual event. It allows you to get up to date on anything and everything related to Octopus and CodeFresh and other things. And then finally, don't forget our use case page at octopus.com/Kubernetes. Awesome. Thank you very much. Kit, Rob, thank you very much for your great presentation. Thank you for joining us here today. We really appreciate it. And until next time, happy deployments, everyone.